Does Rose die in Outer Banks Season 5? Her fate explained. Warning: major spoilers for Outer Banks Season 5. No, Rose Cameron does not die. She survives a brutal attack by Chandler Groff, who strangles her and leaves her for dead. Rose eventually survives and plays an important role in exposing the truth about Rafe and the Cameron family. So, does Rose die in Outer Banks Season 5? The answer is no, although for a while, the show makes it look like she might be dead. Rose's fate is one of the more surprising side stories in the final season because Chandler Groff becomes increasingly desperate, and Rose ends up directly in his path. And unlike several other characters who don't make it through Season 5, Rose survives the finale. Here's exactly what happens. What happens to Rose in Season 5? Rose Cameron has already been through an enormous amount before Season 5. She's been part of the dysfunctional Cameron family for years, and she's spent much of the series trying to protect herself and her children while navigating the chaos created by Ward, Rafe, and Sarah. But Season 5 puts Rose in an especially dangerous position. As the treasure hunt surrounding the Blue Crown and the Royal Merchant Gold intensifies, Rose becomes connected to information that Groff desperately wants. And Groff is willing to do almost anything to get what he wants. That includes attacking Rose. Does Groff kill Rose?
No.
But he comes frighteningly close. Groff attacks Rose and strangles her, leaving her apparently dead. For a moment, it looks like Rose has suffered the same fate as so many other characters who have crossed Groff. The scene is deliberately brutal because Groff has become increasingly desperate. He's already killed JJ. He's betrayed the people who trusted him. And now he's willing to eliminate anyone who could interfere with his plans. Rose appears to be another victim, but she survives. That's important because her survival ultimately helps expose more of the Cameron family's secrets. Why does Groff attack Rose? Groff isn't attacking Rose randomly. He's trying to protect himself and gain control of the treasure. At this point in the story, Groff has become increasingly desperate. He's stolen the Royal Merchant Gold, and he's trying to stay ahead of everyone hunting him. Rose becomes a problem because she has information and connections that could threaten him. So Groff decides to silence her. It's another example of the same pattern that defines his character. Whenever Groff feels threatened, he chooses violence. And that's ultimately what destroys him. Rose's survival is important. Rose surviving isn't simply a way for the writers to avoid killing another character. It actually gives her story a purpose. Rose has spent much of the series trapped inside the Cameron family's dysfunction. Ward controlled the family. Rafe became increasingly violent. Sarah eventually escaped. And Rose was often left trying to keep everything together. By surviving Groff's attack, Rose gets an opportunity to finally step outside that cycle. And she also becomes connected to the truth about Rafe. That's where her story becomes particularly important. The truth about Rafe. One of the biggest revelations toward the end of Season 5 concerns Sheriff Peterkin's murder. For years, Rafe has carried the consequences of that event. Viewers know that Rafe shot Peterkin back in Season 1. But Ward Cameron manipulated the situation to protect his son. Ward ultimately claimed responsibility for Peterkin's death, allowing Rafe to avoid the full consequences. That secret eventually comes back. And Rose's survival helps bring that family history back into the story. Ward had left behind information that could expose what really happened. That puts Rafe in serious trouble. Does Rose help save Rafe? Rose's survival contributes to the truth coming out, but it doesn't magically erase Rafe's crimes. That's an important distinction. Rafe did shoot Peterkin. Ward protected him. And now the truth threatens to catch up with him. Rafe eventually has to run. This is one of the final steps in his redemption story. He can't simply pretend the past never happened. Instead, he has to face the consequences and decide what kind of future he wants. Rose's survival, therefore, becomes part of the chain of events that finally breaks the Cameron family's cycle of lies. What happens to Rose after Groff attacks her? Rose survives and ultimately remains alive after the main conflict. Unlike JJ and several other characters who die during the series, Rose gets to see the end of the Cameron family story. That's actually fitting. Rose has spent years surviving the chaos created by other people.
Ward.
Rafe. Sarah's conflicts. And now Groff. Her survival means she doesn't become another casualty of the treasure hunt. Instead, she gets to move forward. Why didn't the writers kill Rose? There is a thematic reason for this. Rose represents a part of the Cameron family that survives beyond the treasure hunt. The entire family structure collapses throughout Outer Banks. Ward dies. Rafe is forced to leave Kildare. Sarah builds a new family with John B. And Rose survives. The Cameron name no longer represents the power it once did. That's important because the original series began with the Camerons being one of the most powerful families on Kildare Island. By the end, that power has essentially disappeared. Rose surviving allows the show to demonstrate that not every Cameron has to be destroyed. Some people can simply leave the past behind. Does Rose appear in the final scenes? Rose isn't given the same major happy ending sequence as John B., Sarah, Kiera, Pope, Cleo, and Rafe. The finale focuses primarily on the Pogues and their futures. John B. and Sarah rebuild the chateau. They have a son named JJ. They marry 1 year later. Kiera buys JJ's old property and begins pursuing marine biology. Pope and Cleo build a life together. Rafe leaves Kildare and eventually reconciles with Sophia. But Rose's survival is still significant because she gets out alive. Rose and Sarah. Rose's relationship with Sarah has always been complicated. Sarah never completely trusted her stepmother. And Rose wasn't always the mother figure Sarah needed. But their relationship becomes less important as Sarah separates herself from the Cameron family. By the end, Sarah has created her own family with John B. She isn't dependent on Rose anymore. And Rose isn't responsible for controlling Sarah's future. That separation is actually healthy. Sarah doesn't have to remain trapped in the Cameron family. Rose and Rafe. Rafe's relationship with Rose is similarly complicated. Rose has spent years dealing with Rafe's instability. But Season 5 gives Rafe a chance to change. He becomes an ally of the Pogues. He helps them. He confronts his past. And eventually, he leaves Kildare. Rose surviving means she gets to witness at least part of that transformation. Rafe isn't the same person he was when the series began. And Rose no longer has to live in fear of his behavior. Rose's fate compared with other characters. Season 5 is surprisingly brutal when it comes to deaths. JJ's death happens before the final season, but drives the entire story. Chandler Groff eventually dies. Other characters also die during the Pogues' final adventure. That's why Rose's survival is worth emphasizing. She looks like another victim of Groff, but she isn't. The show deliberately makes viewers think she's dead before revealing that she survived. That creates another small victory in the final season. Groff can hurt her. He can nearly kill her. But he doesn't get to decide how her story ends. What does Rose's survival mean? Rose's survival is another example of the larger message of Season 5. The characters have spent years being controlled by powerful men. Ward controlled his family. Groff controlled JJ. Treasure hunters controlled the Pogues' lives. But by the end, those people lose their power. Rose survives. Sarah escapes. Rafe changes. The Pogues build their own futures. And the Cameron family's old way of life disappears. That's essentially the conclusion of the series. So, does Rose die?
No.
Rose Cameron survives Outer Banks Season 5. Chandler Groff strangles Rose and leaves her for dead, making it appear that he has killed her. But she survives the attack. Her survival is important because Groff's violence doesn't get to erase another member of the Cameron family. She ultimately lives to see the consequences of the family's secrets come to light. And while Rose doesn't receive the huge celebratory ending given to the main Pogues, she escapes the final season alive. That's especially meaningful considering how dangerous Kildare has become. After 5 seasons of betrayals, treasure hunts, murders, and family conflicts, Rose finally gets something she hasn't had much of throughout the series. A chance to survive the Cameron family's chaos. And perhaps the most fitting part is that Groff, the man who nearly killed her and actually killed JJ, doesn't survive. Rose does. Groff's story ends in death. Rose's story ends with survival. And that's one of the quieter victories of the Outer Banks Season 5 finale.